Hello, Ricochet and Breitbart, and welcome to episode 51 of Radio Free Delingpole, broadcasting to you from occupied Europe. Can you hear the excitement in my voice? Can you hear it? You should, because I'm about to announce my special guest today. He is none other than Mr. Mark Steyn. Mark, hello.
Hey, James. I can't follow that. I'm leaving now.
Well, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, mate. Listen, I've got to ask you straight away. I can't beat about the bush here. When you finally get banged up in a cell with Mr. Big in a penitentiary somewhere horrible in America, please can I have your slot on the Rush show?
Right.
I'll keep your seat warm for you.
I'll bequeath that. I'll bequeath that to you. And in actual fact, I don't know that Rush would object to me continuing to guest host the show live from my jail cell. He's relatively relaxed about that kind of things. But you're right.
Do you have a prison in mind?
Well, the problem, and people find this hard to believe, but it is one of the many fascinating features of U.S. law that Canadians are not eligible for minimum security jails. We're regarded as such a special risk that when we get sent to prison, we can't go to minimum security jail. So if a Canadian gets 30 days in jail for like check bouncing at the local general store or something, he has to go and serve it with all the hardcore Colombian drug dealers and all the rest. So that will be an interesting experience if it comes to that.
Yeah, plenty of material for the Rush show, which it sounds like you're not going to give me, despite your incarceration. Okay, well, thanks for that. I suppose we ought to explain, for the benefit of any listeners who are not in the loop, why it is that you might be facing Chokey. Tell us about your epic court case, Mark, because you're having a battle with one of my old friends, Michael Mann, the creator of the infamous hockey stick chart. Now, what did you say about him? I'm not sure what the laws of libel are. Are we allowed to repeat the terrible things you said about him on air?
I think we're allowed to repeat it in a discussion of the case. I basically dispute the hockey stick, as do you. The hockey stick was the single most important image in selling climate alarmism to the planet at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century. The single most dramatic image. It basically showed the last 1,000 years, as all your readers know, James, as a sort of the flat handle of a hockey stick, and then the late 20th century shooting up and this big red line disappearing out the top of the graph, and everybody who looked at that said, holy cow, if that's what it is now, what's it going to be like by the year 2014? We're all going to fry. And that hockey stick graph was used to sell climate alarmism to people around the planet. I thought it was nonsense. I think it's a crock. And Michael E. Mann, Ph.D., has, as I well know from the legal filings, has decided to sue me. And in the usual way, you were quite envious. You thought, oh, why didn't he sue me? Bring it on, and all the rest of it. And as much as I enjoy a bit of that, James, no one knows quite what it's like being in the hell of the American so-called justice system until you actually are in the hell of it. It's a nightmare. It'll take years. I will win, but he will regret having taken me on. But it is a tiresome, tedious, and ruinously expensive proposition, as he well knows.
Well, tell me, why do you think that he went for you? It's not like you're a wallflower. It's not like you're known to be the kind of guy who surrenders at the first shot. And also, the second part of that question is, the American legal system seems to be much kinder towards what you might call fair comment than the English legal system. I mean, I think he would make hay with the English libel system, which acts in favor of the complainant, whereas the US, I always thought, was big on stuff like freedom of speech. I thought it was protected by the Constitution.
Yeah, I always thought that too. Actually, I would put it this way: that Americans enjoy more absolute freedoms than anybody on the planet. It's very different from the English system in that they wrote it all down. You know, Britain has an unwritten constitution, and Britain's lion cubs have kind of, I would call them semi-written constitutions. If you look at Canada's and Australia's, it's like paragraph 2 says, executive power shall be invested in Her Majesty. And that's all. It doesn't mention there's going to be a prime minister or anything like that. It's just all sort of unspoken. The Americans did things differently. They wrote everything down. And so on paper, you have absolute right to freedom of expression. But it will cost you half a decade of your life had the right to say that. That's the difference. And I think that's actually, I mean, I think the system I'm in is sort of sclerotic and dysfunctional. It has a very politicized judiciary. There's not judges so much as ideological judges, which is always a problem. And for that reason alone, Mann, I think you asked why he took me on. I think he exists in a climate bubble, and he didn't really know who I was. And so he thought I'd just be like a lot of the people he's threatened legally over the years. He'd send a lawyer's letter and we'd fold. Or he'd send a lawyer's letter and there'd be a bit of back and forth. But as the trial date approached, we'd all get nervous and we'd settle. Well, I fought a big battle up against the Canadian Islamic Congress and Canada's Human Rights Commissions and wound up getting a law repealed. In part because of my battle and my friend Ezra Levant's battle. In Australia, you well know, you did that famous headline a couple of years ago, Free Speech in Australia is Dead. I don't think I can single-handedly get Australia's equivalent law changed, but I'm going to be down there later this year, and I think me and Andrew Bolt and a few others actually can get that law changed. And I'm not confident that I'm not arrogant or deluded enough to think I can get America's system change, but certainly things do need to change. It all takes too long, it's all too expensive, and it's all full of this procedural mumbo jumbo, so that you get there on the witness stand, you're 12 seconds into your answer, and there's an objection on some technical ground that is absolutely not material to any prejudice or anything. So they basically turned it into a club. And the parties to any kind of lawsuit in America are basically just like pieces on the Monopoly board that the lawyers are playing with. So the lawyer says, I'll take the little Stein figurine for this game, and they chug around the board and they say, oh look, I've landed on interlocutory appeal of preliminary motion to dismiss. Collect another $400,000. And that's basically how the whole thing works. And you do eventually get weary at just the sort of tossing huge sums of money into the great sucking maw, and you're nowhere near the actual trial date. It's incredible. It's incredibly dispiriting.
Well, you said earlier that you think that Michael Mann's hockey stick is a crock, but it's not just you and it's not just me, is it? That hockey stick has been discredited on any number of occasions for any number of reasons. I mean, I could understand Mann pursuing this case if he had a leg to stand on, but he doesn't, which does rather raise the question to me, how can he afford to pursue this vexatious case? I mean, how much has it cost him so far, would you say?
I would say it's cost him $27.38, for a shoe shine and a bagel before his one appearance in the courtroom to date. Other than that, it's cost him nothing. There's big, well-funded climate change legal support groups that exist to go after the so-called deniers like you. And
yes.
and
Don't scare me. We could share cells, maybe.
Wouldn't
that be cool?
Well,
we would have such
wait a
fun,
minute.
Mark. I would not try and have sex with you, I promise. We would just talk about high things and, exchange books and stuff. And
Yeah,
I know what goes
it
on in prison.
it's easy to promise not to have sex with me. We'll see how that holds up.
Yeah, all
We'll
right.
see how that holds up in the
Yeah.
28th year of the 45-year sentence, James. So I'm
All
not
right.
taking that. I'm
Yeah,
not taking
all
that
right.
guarantee.
Okay, all right. Yes, no. Well, you've come to the point I was heading towards, which is who the hell is funding this case? Who are these people? Is it George Soros? Is it, I don't know, the
Well,
Sierra Club? Is it?
Well, it's legal defense, so-called legal support groups, funded by people like George Soros and this other fella who's opposed to the Keystone Pipeline, and it's well organized and it's pain-free for him. Michael Mann has an ideological lawyer. His principal lawyer is Peter Fontaine. Who's the one who's brought suit against a retired professor called Tim Ball up in Vancouver, who's the one who wrote a letter to Minnesotans for global warming, saying that there was no right to parody Michael Mann's facial likeness in a parody video they did called Hide the Decline. Apparently
It's well worth catching that one.
Yeah, it is a great video, but Michael Mann's lawyer claims that uniquely in American law, that Michael Mann's eyes, nose, eyebrows, cheeks, pate are protected by copyright, and you cannot mock them or parody them or caricature them unless you receive a special license from Michael Mann's representatives allowing you to do so.
So in fact, Mark, what you could say is that Michael Mann is a bit like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that you're not allowed to use his image, lest the true believers be offended by this blasphemy. Is that the kind of deal going on here?
You're absolutely right, James, that this is basically a prophet of Muhammad situation. He is the prophet of climate change. People say exactly the same. By the way, I often feel, like when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was president of Iran and used to say that, we have to widen the streets of Tehran because the 12th Imam will be showing up any moment. And then you listen to Michael Mann, who thinks the world is going to end in 2036, or the Prince of Wales, who thinks the world is going to end in, I think it's 3 years and 4 months now. By comparison, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad widening the streets for the return of the 12th Imam is actually the least insane of these guys. So there are a lot of similarities between the Prophet Muhammad and the Prophet Michael Mann.
So a story I sometimes hear about this case is that Mark Steyn is being reckless. He is showing reckless disrespect for the US judicial system, which, as we know, is the finest in the world, and he is also putting National Review in a bit of a pickle by refusing to settle, and he's being difficult. What would you say about these? Why is it that you are pursuing this case to the bitter end?
Well, I was told that up in Canada. The human rights commissions, before they took me on, had a very good reputation. And when I said this system is actually evil, it disregards equality before the law, due process, all the ancient rights that English law expects. People said, people aren't going to be put up with some crazy right-wing nut like Mark Steyn going bananas and trashing our human rights commissions. Well, by the end of it, all this reasonable people, the Booker-winning novelists like Margaret Atwood and all the rest of the gang, they were all eventually on board with this. That sometimes you have to go crazy just to drag the thing in the inch of sanity, in 1 inch in the direction of sanity. It takes an awful lot of effort, and I think. To my mind, that's really the only way to do it. You're up against the odds are stacked against you. I had a judge who couldn't even get the defendant straight in Washington, D.C. I had a judge who misrepresented the nature of certain reports on Michael Mann. I had a judge, in fact, who was too lazy to read any of the briefs or anything. And I think you're entitled to say, I don't get the American deference toward judges. I think it's something to do with, having gotten rid of George III. I think a certain amount of monarchical reverence that any society has to get transferred elsewhere. And I think Americans have transferred it into this absurd over-reverence for the judiciary. I don't think a third-rate judge should be any more commanding of respect than a third-rate plumber should be. And I don't. And to me, a judge is as good as their judgments. And if you don't like their judgments, and if their judgments don't even manage to get the defendants right, and if their judgments don't even manage to understand what the core exhibits and filings mean, then I think you're entitled to say that. And this, I don't like the Supreme Court. There's a case going on right now in front of the Supreme Court about whether people have the right, if you happen to have a company and you object to, and you have religious objections to providing certain abortion facilitating drugs to your employees, whether you have the right to do that. I don't think those things are for some guy in a robe to decide. And I think the over lawyerization of America is actually one of the things that's. I love this country, but our old boss Conrad Black is absolutely right when he says, America employs more lawyers than the rest of the planet put together. They suck up 10% of GDP. That's like the GDP of Australia tossed down the toilet in legal bills. And what do you have to show? Everything is done. People say, what is this nonsense? Putin walks in and takes the Crimea, and Obama announces that he's going to impose travel restrictions so that if Putin's nephew wants to go to Disneyland, he won't be able to. What is the meaning of that? Well, that's a lawyer's approach to foreign policy. What is Obamacare? Obamacare is a lawyer's approach to universal health care, where, there's no actual doctors, nurses, or even hospital janitors involved. It's all about regulations and penalties and taxes. It's a lawyer's version of health care. It's a lawyer's version of foreign policy. Eventually, you over-lawyerize everything, and then the whole country falls apart.
But doesn't it make you think maybe you and I chose the wrong jobs? We should have been American lawyers, shouldn't we?
Well, there is something. Well, no, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why that would be a mistake. It looks great on TV. I love legal shows on TV. Yeah. I'd love to be, because you know how it is in an English courtroom. The barristers stand still, whereas in American courtrooms, they're like prowling around in front of the jury and all over the floor and everything. And it would be great to be able to be one of those guys in the suits prowling and saying, "Objection, Your Honor," every 12 seconds, just like it is on TV. But in practice, you hardly ever get into court. The trial is like an afterthought in the American system these days. Over 90% of federal criminal cases are like settled out of court. Dinesh D'Souza, who made this documentary about Obama that was a big hit documentary just before the 2012 election. Obama bided his time and then sicked the federal Justice Department on him, who decided he'd committed a $15,000 campaign violation. And in return for that guy, Dinesh D'Souza, was handcuffed and perp-walked into the courtroom, where the judge set bail at $500,000, confiscated his passport, so Dinesh, who lives in New York, can't give a speech in Toronto, and said that if he wants to give a speech inside the country, if he wants to go to Hartford, Connecticut, or Boston, Massachusetts, he needs permission from that judge. That's evil. And I don't like Dinesh D'Souza, and I don't find him particularly pleasant. So there's no solidarity here. But I think it's just absolute. I think it's evil for a $15,000 campaign violation. You're handcuffed, perp walked, passport confiscated, $500,000, and Dinesh at some point is going to have to. They're going to say, well, Well, if we go in a court, you'll be looking at multiple counts. So there'll be 12 counts on this $15,000 nothing campaign finance. And each count will entitle you to 30 years in jail. So you'll be going to jail for, 360 years. Or you can plead it down to, just doing community service and having a suspended sentence and writing a check to a worthy organization like Mothers Against Campaign Finance Violations. So in other words, he'll be under extreme... The choice for him is either settling and admitting to something or having his life ruined. And the federal criminal justice system in America in particular is evil and corrupt, and is a disgrace to any civilized society.
So how do we turn this one around? Is there ever going to be any force for change?
Well, I think it has to come soon. I mean, the proportion of people who are lawyers in this country, I mean, there must be I haven't looked at the number. I think somebody said well, I know just from the bar numbers of some of the attorneys in this case. There's over 1 million in Washington D.C. I mean, so actually they're one of the biggest demographic groups in the country. So if you think about it. When politicians are on the stump and they're saying, well, we need to do this to appeal to Hispanics, and we need to do this to appeal to black people, and we need to do this to appeal to gays, actually, the lawyer, the attorney,
yes.
American community outnumbers all of those people put together, which is why, actually, for all the talk about appealing to gays and Hispanics and everybody, is American cabinets tend to be full of people with law degrees. That's actually the demographic that matters.
Do you reckon? Could that be the real reason that Obama got re-elected? It wasn't the black vote, as we were led to believe. It was, in fact, the lawyer vote. Solidarity. Yeah. Sharks being with sharks.
Yeah, I think there's something to do. I think there's a lot to be said for that. But Obama is technically a lawyer. Bill Clinton was a lawyer. It is ruled by lawyers, and I don't. As I said, I like people keep using that. When I fired my lawyers on Boxing Day, people kept using this line against me, which sounds terribly clever. Mark Steyn has a fool for a client, meaning that a fellow who's hasn't got his own lawyer and is representing himself, as I was then, has a fool for a client. It's an old English joke. It's an 18th century English joke. Well, that may have made sense in 18th century England, which was a very lightly lawyered society. But the reality is that when you have as many lawyers as the rest of the planet put together, you've got more bad lawyers than anywhere else on earth.
Yes.
And it's actually finding a good lawyer becomes, I'm not anti-lawyer. I've got close legal friends. I've got a copyright lawyer for my copyrights. I've got a corporate lawyer for my business. I've got long-time QC friends in Toronto and Oz and the UK whose services I've used for many, many years. But the idea that when there are lawyers everywhere, that distinction means something. I mean, this country is over-regulated, over-lawyered. It's all about the fine print. It's all about the paperwork. My favorite, the single line that set the tone for the war on terror was about 2 days after America began bombing Afghanistan and trying to get the Taliban out. And Mullah Omar was in a car fleeing the capital. And a drone had him in his sight and was about to press the button and blow the one-eyed mullah to kingdom come. And a military lawyer watching it back at CENTCOM in Florida said, I'm not signing off. General Tommy Frank said, I'm not signing off on this. My JAG, meaning my military lawyer, Judge Advocate General, I'm not signing off on this. My JAG doesn't like it. In other words, because of some lawyer's decision, Mullah Omar wasn't blown to kingdom come as he richly deserved to be, and he's going to be back in Kabul 3 months after the Americans withdraw. When you over-lawyerize everything, it leads to bad consequences. Just from not your kids not being able to play on the swing set at the school because of liability issues, to whether you can blow the hell out of Mullah Omar on the other side of the planet.
So, Mark, one of the things that really puzzles me in all this, you're financing your defense yourself, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm basically. I was trying to. I was trying to do. I made a Christmas disco record a couple of years ago, which I think I don't like to boast, but I do actually think is the best Christmas disco record anyone's ever made. And
wait there, Mark, because actually, before this show, I think Scott is going to insert some of me singing about my excitement about you, and I sing about I'm so excited and I just can't hide it. So I think that there's going to be some stiff competition there. But sorry, carry on. You made an excellent record. Yeah.
Well, I tell you something. If you're singing I'm so excited, and I just can't hide it.
I just can't hide it.
Well, okay, I'll give it to you on the falsetto. You can have that. But I was hoping that people would actually finally, belatedly, make my Christmas disco record a smash hit, and I'd be able to fund my defense that way. But I've actually had to do the slightly wider range of products. So people have been buying my books, and people have been buying some little Michael Mann mocking mouse pads and other gifts we have. And I'm actually confident. That I can fund my legal offense this way and see it through. And it's different. But again, I don't. There's a. The idea. I mean, I'm lucky that my lawyers have recalibrated their rates in my favor because they think this case is important. And I'm very grateful to that. But I learned last year when you just do it the sort of standard way. I was distracted with other matters, and I wasn't really paying too much attention to anything. And to have lawyers who blow through $500,000 and you have absolutely nothing to show for it, at the end they lose everything in the course of a year, and then they say, "Oh, by the way, that's $500,000, and we're setting billing rates now for 2015, which suggests we're not planning on winning anything anytime soon." I understand that's the system, but to any non-American, it's actually repulsive, and there's no reason for any sane person to go along with it. So I'm trying to do things a little differently, and so far my bookstore sales and ebook, Kindle, and Nook and Kobo sales are holding up and helping support my end of it, and I'm confident. I can keep that going.
Well, we'd better give the address of your website, haven't we, so that people can donate by buying Stein memorabilia. What is it? SteinOnline.com.
Yes, SteinOnline.com, and that's Stein with a Y, as in why is this foreigner trashing our magnificent American legal system?
And also, as in St. Ein, I talked about the martyrdom of St. Ein in the Spectator. But
I know, Mark, which I thought would have been a great, actually a great headline. But I gather the wags at the Spectator thought that wasn't quite what they were looking for.
What I wanted to ask you was, why are you even having to finance this case yourself when you are fighting for all of us? You are fighting for liberty, for free markets, for scientific integrity, for truth. There ought to be lots and lots of rich Americans out there who believe in free markets. And this is a problem I've written about before. Why is it that capitalism is so poor at defending capitalism? Why is it that you have all these left-wing charities and pressure groups which are richly funded, but when it comes to stumping up the cash for say free markets, capitalists don't seem to be willing to put their money where their mouth is?
Well, I think that's the sort of nature of the beast, really, that capitalists think individually and the left thinks collectively. And it's funny that the left engages in a lot of projection. You know, Michael Mann is always accusing people of being Koch funded. He accused me of being a Coke-funded denier. My co-defendants are Coke-funded deniers. Well, obviously, if I was funded by the Koch brothers, I wouldn't have been actually representing myself and trying to fund my defense through sales of Stein Online mugs. While he has 5 white shoe lawyers. He's got his main lawyer is the big tobacco lawyer who defended, who was defending Philip Morris, the big tobacco company at the time of all the cancer stuff and all the rest of it. He's the corporate guy. And I think one of the problems is, and I understand it, is that I think rich people do not spend their money on the right effectively. If you look at Mitt Romney's election campaign blew through $1 billion. And I don't think people gave money for this and that, and I don't believe it made any difference in the end. The end result of the election would have been exactly the same. And if you think instead if what they had done, it would make more sense, for example, to buy a TV network and have one TV network pumping out dramas and sitcoms that aren't actually that don't actually reflexively take a leftist view of the world. It would make more sense to buy a publishing house. It would make more sense to buy a movie studio. And I don't think the big donors on the right think too narrowly about it. You know this stuff. You write novels. You write novels, and novels. The idea that a novelist is someone who has to be just left wing. You don't write left wing novels, and I think the right does.
Not knowingly, no.
Not knowingly. And the right spends its money too narrowly, I think, when they look at things like that.
What about Delingstein TV Inc.? We could make such cool dramas, couldn't we? I mean, can you imagine? I'm trying to imagine now. I mean, a lot of them, I have to say, would look.
Yeah, I would be in favour of
Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Breaking Bad, I think, and Game of Thrones. I think Delling Bad and Game of Steins. And then we'll also throw in Dellingstein Abbey for the upmarket crowd. And I think we'd be set. We'd be set right there.
I think we would borrow from the Fox News model and have lots of hot, obviously intelligent chicks, right-wing chicks, sort of decorating our program and reclaiming cool for the right, which after all has been an uphill struggle these last few decades. But I think we can do it. I think you and I, between us, can reclaim cool for the right. Hello, Mark. Is this the NSA, would you say, that's interrupting our calls and sending in drones to spy on us and destroy us? Is that the idea?
I would like to think it's the NSA, but in fact, communications-wise, my corner of New Hampshire is a bit like Baghdad outside the green zone. You know, we get the bit of wet string that connects us to the outside world holds up, and then we get a little bit of an extra snowfall, and it all crashes out. So I don't know. I'd like to think it was like Obama just frying the line, but it might in fact be a more innocent explanation.
No, I like to think that Obama hates us. I like to think that we are a thorn in his side, and that he's trying to destroy our interview now. No, let's finish off by talking about where we are in the great climate wars. You sort of came to the climate wars a bit after me, not much after me. But what attracted you? What made you smell a rat first of all in what was going on?
Well, I'm relatively relaxed about climate. I'm not a climate denier. I think I'm a climate insouciant. I mean, there's something incredibly narcissistic about claiming to save the planet. The planet will be just fine, and what you do is not going to make any difference to it. Whereas if you tried to save your school district, or you tried to save your town, or you tried to save your county, you could actually make a bit of difference. So this is I object to it because it's a huge distraction of real energy onto something phony. And what seemed obvious to me was that the longer we get into the 21st century is that the only important thing you need to know about climate science is that the models are junk, and reality has declined to live up to them. And what I find interesting about this moment in the climate debate is that you're beginning to see, and it's difficult because a lot of people just like to go, oh, Koch brothers, denial machine, and just do. A lot of these guys are so in the bubble that that's all they want to do. But the smarter guys on the climate science side are beginning to see that they've actually got to reposition themselves, and that the turn of the century alarmism, the IPCC alarmism, the Al Gore alarmism is going nowhere. Not because the Koch brothers or anybody else is funding denial, but because millions and millions and millions of ordinary people around the planet just aren't buying it. And they might, and if climate science was smart, they might buy something that was just marginally more connected to reality. And the smarter climate scientists, I think, are beginning to get that. And the Michael Mann hysterics, the Al Gore hysterics, the Rajendra Pachauri hysterics, that all sounds like some clapped-out boy band that's 15 years past its sell-by date.
Yes, I think the extreme alarmists are very, very reluctant to admit their beat. The analogy I often use is werewolves in World War II. You remember in 1945, the most fanatical members of the SS formed these groups called werewolves, which a bit like the Japanese soldier on the island who refused to admit the war was over and carried on fighting for the emperor. I think there will be the people like Michael Mann who will go on inhabiting those islands and fighting the cause, the doomed cause of global warming forever. But the problem is that these people have the power to make life miserable for people like you and more generally for everyone else listening to this show via regulation, taxation, a ban on cheap energy, i.e. fossil fuels, the ruination of the landscape with bat-chomping eco-crucifixes and hideous solar farms and so on. And I think it's going to be a long time before we get this oil tanker turned round.
No, I think you're right. I mean, the title of your book, Watermelons, nails the thing that it's a sort of eco veneer on a vast statist enterprise, and the advantage of it is that it appeals in horrible ways, not just to left-wing statists, but to right-wing statists too. I mean, in your own country, in Britain, it was the so-called Conservative Party that was flirting with the idea of carbon allowances. You know, the Soviet Union banned freedom of movement because they didn't want people to get outside the country and find out what it was like to live in a free society. The British Conservative Party was flirting with restricting freedom of movement on the grounds of saving the planet. And at their Monday night poker game in hell, Hitler, Stalin, and Mao must be sitting around the table laughing their socks off of that. Saying, "Oh, what a brilliant idea! If only we'd thought of that." I mean, it is. That's the problem. It's so climate change is appealing to big government types because it's about government. Because it's the minute you say, oh, it's about the climate. The minute you say it's about rainfall, it's about clouds, it's about sunlight, it's about CO2. That floats across town and county and state and national borders. So we've got to have a vast planetary regime to regulate. I mean, it's the most convenient one-size-fits-all blueprint for totalitarianism anyone's ever come up with.
Yes, people often ask me what it is that I so object to about David Cameron. And I suppose the one obvious answer is that when he became Prime Minister, the first thing he did was go to the headquarters of Greenpeace and announce that he wanted to lead the greenest government ever. And this was after he'd been responsible for helping to cook up the Climate Change Act with an environmentalist activist called Bryony Worthington from Friends of the Earth. You can't get much more hard left anti-capitalism than that. And he sort of cooked up a cozy agreement with her to help bring in this legislation to decarbonise the British economy at the cost of £18.2 billion a year every year till 2050. Now, that is not the action of a Conservative Prime Minister, I would suggest.
No, and I think, I mean, when you're talking about David Cameron, you're talking about the acme of unprincipled squish, and to that kind of mentality, gesture politics are incredibly appealing, and that's why people like the idea of wind turbines. It doesn't matter that they're entirely useless and they just slaughter birds and all the rest of it. It appeals to the vanity of a certain kind of mentality. In other words, it's the classic liberal thing. It's like liberal poverty programs. You know, it doesn't matter what they do for the poor; they make me feel good about me. And and the environment is that on steroids. And if you look at, I mean, David Cameron, shortly after he became leader, you remember this thing? He wanted to stop, I think it was Boots, who had chocolate oranges for sale right next to the cash register, and he thought it would be healthier for Britain if they had real, oranges instead next to the cash
that'll
register.
Work.
But the idea that someone who purports to be a conservative thinks that it's the state's role to determine whether you can have a chocolate orange or a real orange next to the cash register. I mean that's the kind of thing that's easy to take a stand on. What's it called? Bernard Shaw's play, the Chocolate Orange Soldier. That's what he'd be doing if he were rewriting it for David Cameron today. I mean, this is you don't need, anyone can have chocolate orange courage, and the reality is. This is a perfect topic for these kind of politicians, because you say, if we don't do this by 2100, it'll be 2 degrees warmer or whatever. So we have to have these massive regulations, and no one will know. No one will know. We won't be here in 2100. But the idea of the Prince of Wales, God bless him, at least says the world is going to end in whatever it is, 3 years and 2 months now. But again, it's part of it's part of an attack on, I think, mass culture. So when the Prince of Wales attacks consumerism as destroying the planet, what he means is it's fine for him to live in a bunch of palaces and be helicoptered from one to another. But if the guy in the terrace house decides he'd like to live in a semi-detached, or maybe in a house on its own with, a half-acre garden, then suddenly, if everybody wants that, the whole planet's going to go to hell. So it's a classic elite against the masses thing, and that's why it's not flying, because at a certain level, the masses get that they don't want to be told by Al Gore and the Prince of Wales how they're supposed to live.
Mark, I have so enjoyed having you on the show, and I can see that when we spend our years together in that prison cell, we're going to have a hell of a lot to talk about. Now, will you promise me that you will come back onto the show one day?
Yeah, but if you start to sing, I'm so excited, and I just can't hide it, I will be calling for the guard.
Well, you can sing Kung Fu Fighting to me back, and we can maybe stage the prison musical. Can you imagine?
Now everyone else in the jail is asking for a transfer. Cruel and unusual punishment. Thanks a lot, James. To be continued. Thank you, Mark. You were listening to Radio Free Delingpole, broadcasting to you from occupied Europe. Thanks and goodbye.